Before you ask, it's a compression glove. I have a sprained knuckle. Hopefully, it's not tendonitis. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie, Poor Things. Spoiler alert for anyone who cares, and also just a content alert that we're going to get into some graphic sexual talk in this video. Anyway, so Yorgos Lanthimos, I was very excited about this movie, and I was very excited to hear that Emma Stone had won an Oscar for it. I love that Yorgos Lanthimos is migrating into the realm of mainstream Hollywood, and that he will have access to mainstream Hollywood level budgets and be able to do some really incredible, really cool stuff going forward. I It's funny, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, even though I hated the underlying message. And so, Yorgos Lanthimos has been somebody that I've been a big fan of for a long time. Dogtooth was incredible. The Lobster was incredible. The Killing of a Sacred Deer, I was not quite as crazy about. It felt like it kind of devolved at the end, kind of devolved into a formula horror picture, but it was still a really cool movie and I still enjoyed it. And so I've been really interested to see where he'll go. And this movie, I mean, this is him getting access to, a giant Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood budget and everything. It's 30. He made it on, I believe, $35 million, which is chump change in Hollywood land. But still, most of his movies he costs, between 1 and 4 million. It's very small, very low budget. And the low budget, I think, is it's one of those things where it kind of serves him well because he has to think inside of a certain framework, has to think more about ideas rather than visual presentation. And you get a movie like The Lobster, which is very much about this tremendous depth of character exploration between these people, and it creates a dystopian society without relying on cliches like kind of cyberpunk cliches and that sort of thing, and Orwellian uh, aesthetics and that sort of thing. Creates a very a very engaging dystopian society entirely through dialogue and in a very kind of mundane pastoral setting and that sort of thing. Anyway, so Lobster, my favorite of his. Dogtooth, again, incredible. His Killing of a Sacred Deer is incredible. I need to see his other films, and I'm excited still to see his anthology series, or his anthology film that's coming out. That's going to be really cool. But with this movie, so it's getting into it's interesting because there is so much I loved about this movie. First of all, so it's set in this like steampunk interpretation of the Victorian era. It is absolutely just visually sumptuous on every level. This is like, I mean, how to describe it? It's like if David Lynch directed an adaptation of a China Mayville novel. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible on a visual level. You should see it for the visual brilliance alone. That alone is just absolutely captivating. The visual component, the world of it is stunning. The soundtrack is incredible. The way it uses all of these weird, discordant, kind of almost John Zorn sounding things. Things that they sound like they could be from the John Zorn Game Pieces collection or something like that. Just these weird, discordant things to communicate not just horror, but also comedic elements at the same time, and just really beyond stunning. From a production standpoint, like I said, I would gladly dive into the world of this film again, even though the message was god awful. So what are we talking about? Well, we have Godwin, who is this very much a kind of stock mad scientist, sort of Frankenstein mad scientist sort of character. He's horribly disfigured because he was abused as a child because his father ran medical experiments on him. And he's played by Willem Dafoe amazingly. And there's this young student, one of his students at the university he teaches at, becomes his personal assistant and moves in with him. And he's got all of these weird, kind of weird Island of Dr. Moreau type study, operational surgical studies that he's done where he's attaching, the head of one creature to the body of another, and they do a really great job with the uncanny visual motion of that and everything. Um, and so that's the setup, and we are set up to think that this is that young student that joins that joins the mad scientist Godwin, joins Godwin at his estate, his home. We are set up to think that this is his story, and we are following his relationship with this mad scientist. That is actually not the case, and the misdirection is intentional. So we have this character that lives at the mansion with Godwin, and her name is Bella. And Bella, we find out, is this woman that he rescued, or he dragged out of the river, the local channel, after she had jumped in to try to kill herself. She was pregnant when she tried to commit suicide, and so she is brain dead. So he decides, instead of reanimating her, bringing her back from the grave, what he will do is remove her brain, install the brain of the baby into the woman, and seal her up, and see what happens as this adult body, this baby develops in this adult bodied woman. And so that's the setup for the movie. And again, it's not the science obviously would not hold water in the real world, but it works on the level of, like, if you've read Mikhail Bulgakov or something like that, like it works at that, or the Mary Shelley Frankenstein level, it works at that level, which is really what it's aspiring to do. And is it Dog of Man Dog of Man was Mikhail Buglyakov's novel, where they put the pituitary gland of a dog into or the pituitary gland of a man into a dog's brain, and it evolves into this sadistic furry that's out to kill all the cats and everything. But anyway, it's an interesting novel, but you can't really. I read it ages ago, and it's interesting, very Kafkaesque kind of thing, but you really can't understand it if you don't appreciate, like, he's actually punching down at the Russian working class, and if you're not involved in the politics of that, it's hard to understand. But anyway, but that's where we are in this very captivating setting, watching this woman as she develops and grows, her child brain eventually becoming a fully adult, and everything that she encounters through that, and how she experiences the world. So as she grows up, as she develops, she discovers her sexual capacity, and she is now a fully grown adult woman with the mind of a naive but developing child. And so she is initially betrothed to Godwin's lab assistant as part of his ongoing study of her and everything, betrothed to become her fiance, or her husband and everything, his husband. His wife, sorry, man. Anyway, to become his wife, and then she is seduced by this outsider, this lawyer seduces her and whisks her away for adventures across, again, this lavish, beautiful, steampunk-inspired Victorian-era Europe, everything. And they have these, they go on these wild misadventures until, and she is, throughout all of this, she is becoming incredibly, incredibly hypersexual, and just really diving into her sexual appetite and everything. Again, having the mind of a little girl and the body of this fully developed adult woman. And so, of course, at this point, the film becomes extraordinarily sexually explicit, to such a degree that I think it was released in theaters as an R, but it should have gotten an X, reasonably gotten an X rating. I mean, it's extraordinarily graphic. Not that I'm complaining. I love extraordinarily graphic. But anyway, Emma Stone is stunningly gorgeous as she always is, and throughout the film, she's just mindlessly and mechanically ripping off her clothing. And the character that develops, the woman that develops, has this very she's very much devoid of sentimentality. She's devoid of empathy and compassion and sentimentality and all of this. She has this very stiff, analytical, scientific way of interpreting the world, and it's it's one that I can certainly relate to. But it becomes very problematic in what's ultimate to me and what's ultimately said about the character and the direction she ultimately goes. So the dashing attorney that she's run off with wins a bunch of money gambling. She naively gives it away to some people, and they are left destitute in Paris. And so she becomes a prostitute. And of course, he starts freaking out because she's a prostitute and how dare she? And she has no capacity whatsoever to understand why he's freaking out and all of that. And, again, I say all of this as someone who is pro sex work. I share her confusion in confusion in the puritanical mores of so many people and everything. Of course, the thing that's happened with this man is that he's fallen in love with her, and we're meant to understand that in his strictly patriarchal mindset, love implies a degree of control that she had over her, and so he's responding in this way. She becomes a prostitute and continues her studies and becomes an avowed socialist, and and ties this into her prostitution, saying that she is her own means of production. This is yet another. This is when it started to get aggravating, and I started to know where this is going. Look, a while back I commented on the book "Tender is the Flesh" by Augustine Basterica, and I pointed out how the book is described as this strong anti-capitalist message because it's about a dystopian capitalist future where cannibalism has become legal, and the implication is supposed to be that we are all so brainwashed and controlled by capitalism that if they told us to start eating each other, we would. And it's like, wait a minute, you need to stop and look at what was going on in Maoist China, what was going on in the old Soviet Union, where things were getting so bad, there was so much scarcity, and people were starving, and things were getting so bad that they were turning to cannibalism without the government having to suggest it to them. In fact, those governments were having to put out propaganda campaigns reminding or messaging public service announcements, if you will, reminding people that it's unethical to eat your dead family members. I mean, that's how bad it was getting. And so it's just amazing to me, like they think that capitalism is going to brainwash us into doing things that people have to start doing to survive under extreme socialism and communism. By the same note, you need to look at how you need to look at what happens to sex workers and that kind of thing under socialist and communist governments. It's not if you want an economic model that allows for prostitution and sex work to flourish, it's capitalism. If the only reason prostitution does not flourish in capitalist country, or the only thing that keeps prostitution from flourishing in capitalist countries is when the government overregulates the market and makes prostitution illegal. But no, it's just beyond ridiculous. But anyway, that's the first thing that this that becoming a prostitute has put her in touch with this like socialist mindset and everything. But what she discovers, and we go through a long montage of one degenerate sex fiend after another coming to her as a for her prostitutional services, so that she can gratify them and gratify their innermost libidinous desires and everything. And it starts getting ridiculously absurd and everything, where we have a scene, for example, where there's a man that wants to get off by having sex in front of his two sons and that sort of thing, his children, and But what happens is throughout she starts to regard men in their most base and primal as being fundamentally pathetic and absurd. And that's represented, for example, there's a scene where she's tied up with a ball gag for this bondage scenario where the guy's humping her leg while she's tied up, and she's just like rolling her eyes and staring off into the distance the whole time. This whole thing has become absurd for her, and she learns that there's this fundamental absurdity in male sexuality, this irreducible absurdity in male sexuality that is fundamentally absurd and stupid and asinine, and she becomes bored with it. She can't. She has no regard for it anymore at all. And what's interesting, at this point, she is. We are presented that she's in some kind of enlightened state when she arrives at this conclusion that men are just these animalistic buffoons when it comes to sexuality and that sort of thing. Previously, that has been portrayed. Women coming to that realization in media, we see it in different works of media. We see it as becoming it's been portrayed as like that realization that coming to a conclusion of intrinsic nihilism like that about male sexuality, or indeed about sexuality in general, is preceded by the woman going down a very or precedes the woman going down a very dark and nihilistic road. A great example of that would be the Lulu plays. The Lulu plays, is it Vetican? I can't, it's the name of the guy that wrote it. But it's two plays that were theater of the macabre, famous theater of the macabre pieces that were about a woman, a cold-hearted, a very cold-hearted sociopathic woman that goes on this nihilistic quest for sexual control over men and everything. And if you know about the Lulu plays now, you will know it because they are the basis for the concept album that Lou Reed did with Metallica called Lulu. I think that record gets a very bum rap from a lot of Metallica fans who, for some reason, every time Metallica puts out something they don't like, they act as if they got no presents for Christmas. And so I think that if you can bring yourself to appreciate Lulu for what it was and what it was trying to say, rather than saying, yeah, it sounds like Grandpa Simpson with Metallica, yeah, trying to complain about it, if you can appreciate it for what it was actually pretty cool and pretty incredible what they did. Anyway, so that's a side point, but that's where she ultimately arrives at. Men are, that she thinks she goes from being, at the start, the men, like the lawyer she runs off with and some of the other men she fucks around with at that point, they love her to death. They think she's incredible when she's a ridiculously naive idiot child with a hypersexual woman's body. So they love her at that point, and then they think she's great at that point. And then as she starts to come into her own, that corresponds with her realizing how pathetic and slimy and silly and worthless all of these man children actually are. And she develops a romantic relationship with a black woman. And I hate to bring race into this, but yes, this is another thing where the only two sympathetic male characters in this entire film are not white, and every single one of the white male characters in this film are portrayed as being malicious, malign thugs, hypersexualized dumbass morons, and sadistic mad scientist type characters. It's one of those things where it's like, don't get me wrong, I'm fully and completely aware of all of the heinous things that white people throughout history have done to other races and minorities, what we would now call marginalized groups and that sort of thing. I'm totally aware of that, and I truly and honestly do sympathize with the people who have had to live through things like that. But this idea that you have to, in cinema, they did the same thing in The Shape of Water, where the only two sympathetic white male characters are gay. One is overtly gay and one is implied to be gay. So they can't have a sympathetic white male character unless they funnel him off into another, another marginalized demographic. It's getting ridiculous. It's getting asinine. You know full well that in reality there are wonderful, amazing, fascinating, kind-hearted, decent, good people of every race, and you know full well that there are vile, awful, disgusting scumbags of every race. Good and evil are not intrinsically spread across one race or another, or not intrinsically given to one race or another. It's beyond asinine. And so anyway, getting back on point, she discovers that sure enough, the black lesbian is able to love her and sexually gratify her in a way. I should say it's only sexual gratification. This is a character who expresses exactly zero capacity for emotional connection whatsoever. None at all for the entire film. But she discovers that the black lesbian is better at eating out her pussy than any of these white men that have just been mindlessly humping her for the entire movie to drool all over the place and get their rocks off. And of course, again, it's like, don't get me wrong. I understand that I understand that there are things about men that women find inherently disgusting, that are inherently disgusting and off-putting to men, and that they have to overcome those fundamental feelings of disgust to find something deeper that they like. That's kind of the point of Beauty and the Beast. That's why it's such an enduring folk legend and everything, or enduring fairy tale and all of that. I get that. I understand that, and I've even had firsthand experience with it on the unfortunate occasions when I've been hit on by gay men that were completely off-putting to me, versus the times that I can remember being hit on by a gay man that looked like, Brad Pitt in his prime, and my response was, well, you're very kind, but no thank you, It's very different when you're being hit on by Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Anyway, so I get that. I get it. But you know that this is not the totality of men. It is not the totality of white people. It is this incredibly stilted thing that people have to do. I feel like they have to do, and it's extraordinary now in Hollywood productions and everything. And I'll get to the correct version of it in a moment, what we ought to have in a moment, or we ought to see in a moment. But continuing to summarize the film. So, having now realized that getting her pussy eaten out by a black lesbian is superior to sex with white men, she returns home, initially returning home wanting to fulfill the marriage that she had with, or the engagement that she had with this man, the scientist student, the academic that she had been betrothed to earlier in the film. She agrees to that. They have a long talk, and she agrees to it only because this is not a marriage of emotions and love or anything like that. It's a purely functional marriage, and they're essentially just friends. So, again, it's like the only man that she'll get involved with is essentially, from a characterological standpoint, a eunuch. Which is funny because the Godwin, the character that brought her to life, is revealed in the film to himself be a eunuch. So her relationship with Godwin evolves over time, and he does have kind of an attempt at a redemption arc himself by, he shows up when she's to be married to the assistant of his. He shows up to walk her down the aisle and everything. And so he is admittedly trying to find a return to the humanity that he's heretofore not been able to embody and express. So he has a little bit of a redemption arc, but at the altar they're just about to be married, and it turns out the woman, Bella's husband, comes rushing in, and the husband being the man that the woman who Bella, the woman who was Bella before she was implanted with the child's brain, that woman was married to this man, and this man comes rushing in and says, "No, you're my wife." And so she wants to go with this man. She goes off with this man, not out of a sense of duty to him, but because she wants to find out what happened to her. And so she goes to live with this man and finds out that he is this very sadistic, vile, cruel person. Where it's interesting, she is very cold and emotionless, but she's not an evil actor. She does not necessarily do evil. She's just not emotionally engaged with the world. Versus this guy is a malign thug. He is a vile person, is incredibly abusive and controls everyone around him with a gun that he carries and all of that. So she comes to realize that the woman whose body she occupies, if it's confusing to keep track of it all, I know, but the original woman, she comes to realize the woman that had been her mother before she was implanted with her brain, with the baby's brain, that woman had tried to commit suicide because this man was horrible, and she did not want to bring a child into the world where the baby would be governed by this man. And so, the one thing, if somebody could remind me, one thing I've it's a great movie, and I'd probably watch it again at some point, but it's really big, and I don't want to unpack it right now. But does anyone remember if we ever established the gender, the sex of the fetal baby whose brain is transplanted? Is it a male brain or a female brain, or male or female baby? I don't think we ever got into that, and I'm curious about that. But anyway, so she escapes from him, mortally wounds him in the process, and so she takes him back to Godwin's mansion, and she and the assistant drag the guy up on the operating table, transplant. And they take out his brain and transplant a goat's brain into it. So at the end of the movie, he's crawling around the mansion, eating grass and that kind of thing. And so it ends with she is now in control of. It ends with her sitting in the back garden of the house. She is now in control of everything. She's about to take her entrance exams to go study surgery, and everyone is confident that she will do extremely well. Her black lesbian lover is now by her side, and the man that was to be her husband is apparently now just kind of her assistant and everything. And now the staff of the mansion is all happy working under her, and there is another. They tried to recreate it's a subplot that they tried to recreate after she left. They tried to recreate the experiment with another woman so that they could have another beautiful childlike idiot to sexually obsess over, and that woman is now portrayed as doing much better and making progress and everything. And scene, we are done. Okay, so here's the thing. I talked about earlier that in a lot of media, when we've had these things where women kind of become, in the way they're portrayed, where they become aggressively sexual and arrive at a point of destructive nihilism. That's one way of portraying that. The Lulu plays are an example of that happening. But there's another thing that is more common, another formula or another path that's a lot more common, and it's a path we've gone down a lot. Especially there was a lot of 70s art house cinema that got into this, and a lot of writing. The books that a lot of those were based on books, be it D.H. Lawrence with Lady Chatterley's Lover, Pauline Riage with The Story of O, Emmanuel, I can't remember the author of Emmanuel, but that kind of thing, where you would have these characters, these women who are, these female characters who are bold, confident women that are they're not necessarily demeaned women, they're not put down, they are women of a certain high caliber, a certain high development as far as who they are and what they are and that sort of thing. O in The Story of O is a successful fashion photographer, for example, that sort of thing. And I'm going off the movie, by the way. I've only read parts of the book. But anyway, so there was this narrative that has been explored in a lot of these things the Emmanuel movies, the early Emmanuel movies. The later Emmanuels, they got into Emmanuel the series, and then the Emmanuel in Space. It just got ridiculous. Emmanuel in Space is where she is now traveling the galaxy traveling the galaxy in a blimp in outer space, in the vacuum of space where there is no oxygen, and she and the crew of the blimp are only able to achieve warp speed by furiously masturbating. But anyway, in the early, Emmanuel 1, 2, 3, and then they started doing Emmanuel in America, Brazil, I think Brazil, and some other places. The idea is that the Emmanuel character goes through and has all of these wild sexual encounters. And no doubt, obviously, these are being the fundamental intent is wild sexual, kinky sexual stuff to get us off, but get off the viewer and everything. But in terms of the character development, what happens is you have a character like Emmanuel who goes through all of the wild, all these wild explorations where, she has like in the early Emmanuel movies, the ones with Sylvia Crystal playing the main character. There's the famous scene where she has this wild lesbian menage a trois on a massage table in Thailand, and then she has a wild encounter with this black man, which would have been wildly taboo at the time. It's not really anymore, but anyway. But she goes through all of these different experiences, and there's this kind of process that could be described as like introspective promiscuity, where these characters, these women, engage in these increasingly bizarre, increasingly wild acts of sexual indulgence, and they come to a greater understanding about themselves and a greater understanding about men and women and sex and relationships and all these things. It's a place of like positive and proactive self-actualization through a process of sexual experimentation and sexual exploitation. That is what you see in the Emmanuel movies. It's what you see in the story of O. In a more mainstream version of the story would be if you've seen the movie Secretary with seen the movie Secretary, where James Spader and Maggie Gyllenhaal have this BDSM relationship that takes her from being this very naive and mentally disturbed woman into being this fully realized, self-actualized woman, paradoxically through the process of bondage and restraint and things like that. And the movie handles it really well. By the way, his last name in that movie is Gray, and it even has the line, "Mr. Gray will see you now," in case you were wondering if there was anything original in 50 Shades of Grey. But anyway, so, and 50 Shades of Grey could be also read as a very ham-fisted handling of the same thing, of the same story. So that is a very common story, a very common exploration to do cinematically and in literature. Like I said, introspective promiscuity, if you will. One example that's it's well done in parts, but it really drags in the narrative. There's a movie called Romance. It was NC-17 when it came out. I can't remember the name of the woman off the top of my head who plays the lead, but Rocco Siffredi, the porn star, has a cameo or has a small character in it. Small in terms of relation to in terms of his relation to the film as a whole. There's no part of Rocco Siffredi's anatomy that could be considered diminutive. But anyway, so there's that. My personal favorite version of this is a movie by Zalman King called Delta of Venus. It was based on the collection of short stories by Anais Nin of the same name. And it stars Audie England, who is one of the most beautiful women that has ever lived in my mind. And the male lead, you will recognize him from the Saw movies. He was also Friar Fuck in Sex and the City. I can't think of his name. Probably Luke something, I think. But anyway, phenomenal movie. And it's about, pardon me, it's about a woman who is a writer in Paris on the in the months leading up to the Nazi invasion of France and everything. And she's learning about, she wants to become a writer of romance and erotic fiction. And she, of course, is inexperienced in her own life. So she's going through this exploration of encounters with men and women and that sort of thing. And she even does the inevitable thing of going into this lesbian orgy and discovering that only women can truly understand women's bodies, that whole thing. But even that does not come off as spiteful and scornful and hateful the way it does in Poor Things. And you understand the title Poor Things is even that is meant to sound condescending and patronizing to the women of the story. That's the point of this, is the ways that men patronize and put women down and infantilize them and that sort of thing. So where am I going with all of this? Well, what happens is they try to do something, I guess, try to find a third option in the promiscuity, the female promiscuity storyline, where it's if we do the non-introspective version of it, where the woman is doing this to belittle men out of spite, she becomes a sadistic, this witchy, sadistic sociopath, and it goes in this very nihilistic direction. Versus then we do the promiscuous introspection route, where she grows as a person and comes to understand deeper things about humanity and men and women and sexuality and romance, and has this deeper, richer experience. There's these two directions, and it's like they try to split the difference. It's like she's trying to, it's like everybody, people don't want her to, they can't accept a story, or they couldn't accept the idea of a story that goes down either of these two natural paths. It's like they wanted to no clip out of they wanted to no clip out of sexual development, or character development. Sorry, they wanted to no clip out of character development and have this woman that is completely cold and emotionless, who has a very specific moral compass but no capacity to express emotions derived from that moral compass, who behaves in a very cold-hearted way that is somehow precisely calculated on a series of emotionless philosophical currents, philosophical conceits, to make her a higher, more moral person. And I guarantee you, every single person involved in this movie thinks that Atlas Shrugged is a terrible novel, even though this is probably arguably, as terms of character development, this is probably the closest thing to an accurate portrayal of Dagny Taggart that we will ever see in mainstream cinema. Anyway, so we are left in this position where this character that started out as captivating and interesting and quirky and fun and fascinating and all of this, by the end of the movie, she is, say it with me, an invincible girl boss that don't need no man. You can just hear the thing of Eric Cartman screeching, I don't care, put a chick in it and make her gay and lame. It's that thing over and over again. It's just, congratulations, you have successfully no-clipped out of humanity. You have achieved this transcendental status of being a biological robot that's completely above, that has gone completely above and beyond any capacity to have any kind of deep emotional or spiritual connection with men, no capacity for romance with men. Congratulations, good for you. You need a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Great, wonderful, And the thing is, what has been accomplished here? I'll tell you the real idea, the real thing we should, if you want to have this progressive attitude around, if you want to have a progressive attitude around sexuality, the real progress is to separate, as they would say, to separate the individual man, the real self-realized, self-actualized individual man, from the patriarchal construct in which he exists, We find humanity, we find our individual realization, our realization as individuals transcendent of the oppressive social structure that surrounds us. This does not have that healthy concept of a resolution where she finds a man that, a very basic example of what I'm talking about would be like in the movie Dirty Dancing, where, Baby, the character of Baby, she finds this man that takes her outside of the strictly patriarchal construct in which she is boxed in. No one puts Baby in a corner. She's boxed in by this patriarchal construct, finds a man who takes her out of that, and she finds fulfillment in doing that, thereby saying, you have found love and happiness, and you have found love and happiness on your own terms, rather than something that should be about your love and your happiness being rigidly controlled and structured and fit into this box that they've got you in. So that's a healthy portrayal of rebelling against this patriarchal machine and everything, versus this attitude that it's not about a social structure, but rather about something that's inherent to the nature of relationships between men and women. The idea that a relationship between a man and a woman is can only be something in which the woman is made subservient to the man and the man dominates the woman. That's their attitude, and that's the attitude of this film. And the painful irony of that is you discover that woke Hollywood and the ultra-conservative Christian nationalists on the other side are ultimately the same people. They have the same values. They both believe that heterosexual couplings, romantic couplings between men and women produce inherently and by their nature produce a social bond where the woman is made subservient to the man who dominates over her and controls her life. It's just that one side thinks that's negative and one side thinks that's positive, but they both fundamentally believe the same thing. And it's so painful and unsatisfying to watch because, as American film goers, what we generally like to see is what we generally want to see is the triumph of the individual self-actualizing above and beyond the oppressive structure in which they exist. That's what we love. Now, don't get me wrong, there are tragedies where that explore alternative expressions of that, kind of like what happens in Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. There are tragedies that explore outside, but fundamentally, our values as Americans were supposed to be self-governance, self-actualization, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what we see, to use Dirty Dancing as an example, when we see Baby finding this man, this desirable man that allows her to pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness on her terms, that's the transcendental thing that we should be pursuing. Whereas what the values of this film seem to be saying, like, it's inevitable. The oppression is inevitable. The oppression is inevitable. Love is this pathetic. Love and sexuality are these pathetic constructs of lower pathetic constructs put in place by lower life forms, and you have only achieved enlightenment and self-actualization when you eschew any hope for positive sexual or romantic engagement with men whatsoever, and you have your lesbian lover by your side, and even that you don't have any actual emotional engagement with. You have fully self-actualized and transcended all of it when you are nothing more than this emotionless machine person that has transcended any need for human connection with any other person. And like I said, I guarantee you everyone who worked on this film thinks Ayn Rand is a complete joke, even though they keep embodying this hilariously bastardized version of her values over and over again. So it's just, yeah, it's just, again, it's that ridiculous woke Hollywood thing of, no female character is allowed to be is allowed to have realistic human development. They all have to be an invincible girl boss that don't need no man, and any degree of compassion, sentimentality, or desire for romance and intimacy that exists within them is portrayed as some kind of shortcoming within the character that has to be transcended by on her path to becoming an invincible girl boss that don't need no man. Now, she always was an invincible girl boss that didn't need no man. The only conflict is in helping her realize that she always was an invincible girl boss that don't need no man. This is beyond tired and beyond ridiculous. We are not calling for you are not calling for the Handmaid's Tale and the full subjugation of women and disenfranchisement of women when you say it would be nice to see movies about real deep romantic connection between men and women, where that real love and human connection on a personal individual level is what is portrayed as the end goal of this path towards individuation and self-actualization. I think the only place where we still see that anymore is in ridiculous, cheesy Hallmark family movies. The tough talking executive, tough as nails executive that comes home for the holidays and falls in love with the handsome blue collar guy that very hackneyed, simplified, stilted version of this is only seen in those Hallmark Channel asinine throwaway movies. And this thing, I mean, again, it's just like, wow, congratulations. You are now a biological robot with no capacity for human emotion. No expression of human emotion or human wants, needs, or desires whatsoever. You have transcended all of that, and you're so much better than the rest of us. Enjoy lording that over us for the rest of your life. Congratulations. That is this movie, and it's such a shame because, again, this movie, I cannot begin to describe to you how beautiful it is, and how immersive it is, and how captivating it is, and how fascinating it is on a visual level. The acting is superb. The performances of these characters are incredible. And this had potential to be so much more, but instead it's just it's just this process of this woman overcoming any vestige of humanity that she could possibly have to become this emotionless, robotic girl boss that don't need no man. And there's even moments where she has this realization midway through the film. She's confronted with the fact that she is very much a part of the bourgeoisie, and the lower class of economic class beneath her is very much struggling and suffering, and she has this horrible emotional breakdown, but that just leads to her being further taken advantage of by men. So it's just this constant message of you can't have any emotion or anything. You can only become an invincible girl boss that don't need no man, which you always were, and we were just trying to help you realize that you always were. It's beyond asinine. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'll close on this note. My favorite animated movie of all time is The Secret of NIMH. And Mrs. Frisbee, obviously she's a female mouse, not an actual woman, but she is an analog for an actual human woman within the story. And she is a great character that is courageous and bold and brave and rises to the occasion and discovers something new about herself in the process of what she goes through in the film. And she is not, and she does so being motivated by compassion and love for her family and her children and her husband that's passed on, and she's not a subservient character at all. She's has agency and is very self-actualized, but she's motivated by real human motivations, and she is weak. She's not an invincible girl boss that don't need no man. Throughout the film, she's haunted by the death of her husband. She wants to do right by her children. She needs those emotional connections, and she's not invincible. In fact, she's an extremely weak character. And that's what makes her interesting, is because she's weak and she has to overcome and work beyond her weakness. That makes her interesting as a character. And on it goes. And she's not a girl boss. She's humble and develops confidence and the ability to function and speak up for herself over time through the film. It's about character development. And it's like we're terrified now that if the female lead is ever anything other than an invincible girl boss that don't need no man, then we're going to I don't know, we're going to backslide into The Handmaid's Tale or something instantly. The nanosecond that's not in every Hollywood movie. And it's kind of like, Andrew, I know people will balk at the mention of the name, but when Andrew Klavan was being interviewed by Jordan Peterson, he's an award-winning mystery writer, he pointed out, we have all these movies now where, like, the female lead character punches the man and he flies through 5 brick walls and splatters into nothing, when in reality, the woman punches a man and she breaks her hand and he assaults her. That's the reality. And how do we deal with that? How do we confront that? That makes for, how do we work around that and help her triumph in spite of that? That's what's interesting. But it's like, we're terrified to have a female character that can be an underdog. Like, the underdog is what's interesting. This woman is only ever, she's never even really the underdog. She's just naive for a time period, and as her brain develops, she's instantly perfect. So it's this weird thing. It's like even her naivete is pointing towards her already being perfect. It's difficult to describe if you haven't seen the movie, but those are my thoughts on it. Incredibly, like I said, incredibly beautiful movie. I really do want to see what Yorgos Lanthimos has coming next. Again, he's always been one of my favorite new directors and everything like that. The fact that I can cross my hands like this and do this with my cross my arms like this and do this with my fingers tells me that hopefully the compression glove is working. I think I did it because when I sit, if I play, I've been doing a lot of bass on recording projects lately. And when I sit in my apartment and play bass, I can't, the bass itself does not, an electric bass does not have a lot of acoustic properties. And so you have to, if you want to hear it make noise without plugging in, because I'm in an apartment, you have to really pull. And I think that's what did it. Like, this guy's like my main attack with bass. Anyway, that's a side note. But I think that's what did it. And so I've been playing pick style bass lately for dealing with that. So anyway, and yes, I'm also putting ice compression on it too. Anyway, cool. That's that. So, bye.